Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Editorial Discussion. This is Preeti Sagar. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Preeti Sagar, and welcome back to Editorial Discussion. So, I have taken up all such important editorials which had been there in the newspaper in the past 1 week. So, first article that is about. Wait, where is that? So first article, this is about nuclear technology or importance of nuclear technology. So this editorial had come in the Hindu in the last week. So the editorial topic is the draw of space and nuclear technologies. It remains to be seen whether the new ventures of Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates will strike a chord and benefit mankind. So basically, this article is discussing about nuclear technology or use of nuclear technology, emphasize on the nuclear technology, which can be beneficial for the human mankind or which is benefit for the mankind. So what is the importance or what are the importance of nuclear technology in different fields? We'll talk about that. So context of this article, that is about that Jeff Bezos, who's a billionaire, and he was preparing to blast off into the space. Okay, no issues, I'll do that. So this billionaire, Jeff Bezos, he has said that he was preparing to blast off into space last month. And another billionaire, who is Bill Gates, he took an equally momentous decision to launch his own nuclear reactor with an eye on the possibility of exporting fast breeder reactors to power-hungry nations. So basically, both these billionaires had given a chance to those countries who are power-hungry. Okay, and these countries are what that they have started, or there is a possibility that these two billionaires will export fast breeder reactors to those countries who are regarded as power hungry. So both of them characterize their initiatives as essentially aimed at the environment to reverse climate change. Answering criticism on this expensive and wasteful adventure, Bezos has insisted that he had an environmental vision, that we need to take all heavy industry, all polluting industry, and move it into space and keep Earth as this beautiful gem of a planet that it is. Mr. Gates has stressed the importance of nuclear power as the clean energy that requires to meet the requirements of the world, even though the safety of nuclear reactors and the risk of proliferation of nuclear weapons are a growing concern. So basically, if we talk about nuclear energy or nuclear technology, so this is an alternate way of using technology or alternate technology, we can say. As the world is tackling the problem or tackling the situation of climate change, because of emphasis on various energy or non-renewable energy resources or sources. So whether it is fuel, whether it is industries in the world. So because of their working functions, what is happening? Global temperature is increasing. So nuclear technology is an alternative way which can deal the problem related to climate change, which can deal the problem related to increasing temperature in the environment. But there are various concerns which are associated with the nuclear energy or nuclear technology, like nuclear weapons, like countries who are power hungry, they are in this hurry or they are in this race that they have to acquire more and more nuclear weapons so that they can be, so that it can enhance their strength among the world, among the nations. So in that situation, these becomes some of the concerns related to it, but there are many benefits of nuclear technology. So if we talk about future of nuclear power, so back in 2007-8, Director General of International Atomic Energy Agency, that time, Mohammad El Baradei. So he had established a committee of eminent persons to look at the future of nuclear power in 2020 and beyond that. So it was asserted that international community had both auspicious opportunities and there are many significant challenges to tackle as the world moves into the 7th nuclear decade. Expanded use of nuclear technology that offers immense potential to meet important developmental needs. And in this fact, to satisfy energy demands and to mitigate the threat of climate change, two of the 21st century's greatest challenges would be there are major opportunities for the expansion of nuclear energy. Like countries, they will be in the race to acquire more and more nuclear weapons. So report has predicted that a nuclear renaissance will solve not only the world's energy problem, but it will also alleviate the issues related to climate change. So as I've said, there are various risks associated with the nuclear energy, like nuclear accident of Japan, Fukushima. So the expectations was short-lived because Fukushima Daiichi accident in Japan that occurred on 11th March 2011, it completely transformed the nuclear power situation beyond its recognition and dealt a blow to plans for swiftly scaling up nuclear power to address not only climate change, but also energy poverty and economic development. So International Atomic Energy Agency's article that was named as Nuclear Power 10 Years After Fukushima, The Long Road Back, had said that as the global community turned its attention to strengthening nuclear safety, several countries had opted to phase out nuclear power. The nuclear industry was at a standstill except in Russia, China, and India that has reopened their reactors to produce energy. Even in India, if we talk about the expected installation of imported reactors did not materialize because of our liability law and the anti-nuclear protest in the proposed locations. For example, Kudankulam power project we talk about. So lots of protests had been faced because of safety regarding nuclear technology or installation of nuclear technology. So India had to go in for more indigenous reactors to increase the nuclear component of its energy mix. Basically, what happened, if we talk about nuclear deal, so what happens if we are involved in nuclear deal with other country, then that country's nuclear power developers or companies who are working in this field, they will come and they will install. But if any accident occurs, so who will take the responsibility? Whether that country to which we have done this, we have cracked this deal, or India, okay, where this installation of nuclear power project has been done. So in that situation, what happens? The situation becomes very critical because nobody wants to take the responsibility regarding emergency declaration or regarding any accident happens. So in that situation, it becomes very critical, and that is why there are some issues related to this article as well, related to this matter as well. So India had to go, or India has to, what India can do for, India can go for indigenous development of reactors, nuclear reactors, so that it can increase the nuclear component of its energy mix. So more than 50 nations which are knocking at the door of International Agency of, International Atomic Energy Agency for nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, like quietly withdrew their request. And after intensive efforts to strengthen nuclear safety, the article is saying that, and with the global warming, that becomes very more apparent, nuclear power is regaining a place in global debates as a climate-friendly nation once again. Countries like Japan and Germany, even as organizations like Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and International Energy Agency, they have recognized the ability of nuclear power to address major global challenges that remained uncertain whether the value of this clean, reliable, and sustainable source of energy will achieve its full potential at any time. Fukushima Daiichi incident, if we talk about, so the article is saying that that continues to cast a shadow over the prospects of the nuclear power, how safe it is. So furthermore, in some more major markets, nuclear power lacks a favorable policy and financing framework that recognize its contribution to climate change, mitigation, and sustainable development. So without such a framework, nuclear power will struggle to deliver on its full potential. Even the world remains as dependent on the fossil fuels as it was 3 decades ago. So it means if we are, or world wants to use or dependent on the nuclear technology, then before using it, there is the need to have proper safeguard against it. If proper safety or safeguards would not be there, then world will be dependent on the fossil fuels as it is right now. So what about Bill Gates' plan? So even when the uncertainty continues and the anti-nuclear lobby is gaining momentum, Terra Power, that is nuclear company founded by Bill Gates, had just announced an agreement with private funders, including Warren Buffett, and state of Wyoming, US, to site its Netrium fast reactor demonstration project over there. Moreover, since it falls within the advanced small modular reactor project of US Department of Energy, department will subsidize the project of one of the richest men in the world to the extent of $80 million this year. As an article by Non-Proliferation Sentinels in US, Henry Sokolsky and Victor Glinsky, they have titled Bill Gates as fast nuclear reactor, will it bomb? That says that Mr. Gates is believing that fast breeder reactors will replace the current reactors. Department of Energy of USA and other nuclear enthusiasts, they are also believing that small factory-built modular reactors will be cheaper and safer, and it will also attractive to foreign buyers, that they will revive America's nuclear industry, and it will also enable USA to compete in an international market which is now dominated by China and Russia. So another benefit that is envisaging is that fast breeder reactors will provide a solid nuclear industrial base for meeting USA military nuclear requirements. So Department of Energy, that is found bipartisan congressional support for funding the project. And Sokolsky and Glinsky, they have challenged the move on several grounds, such as failure of earlier efforts to develop such reactors and risk of the turning of inert uranium to plutonium, and then using the plutonium as fuel. So they have argued in their article that it can even breed excess plutonium to fuel new fast reactors. What concerns them most is the plutonium is a nuclear explosive which can be used for developing a bomb. It means by using plutonium, bomb can be, or nuclear bomb can be created. So this is the biggest concern. So they are afraid that availability of plutonium through commercial channels would be fraught with dangers. And their article is also saying that TerraPower, that announced in March that Natrium would be fueled with uranium enriched to 20% U-35 rather than explosive plutonium. So it means uranium, 20% uranium U-235 can be used in the place of plutonium. So the question being asked, if Natrium reactor takes off and is offered for export, and will the same restraint will apply? So currently only a handful of the nations can make 20% enriched uranium. Critics are believing that there will be a rush to make 20% enriched uranium worldwide. So the main objection to the nuclear enrichment beyond a point in Iran had arisen from the fact that it would lead to weapon-grade uranium being available for them. And another objection that has been raised against the Gates project, which is cited in the article, that the principal reason for preferring fast reactor is to gain the ability to breed plutonium, because plutonium is in explosive nature. So that is surely what foreign customers will want. And the way it is configured, the reactor would make and reuse massive quantities of material that could also be used as nuclear explosive in the warheads. So India's fast breeder reactor, that is not subject to international inspections, is seen as capable of feeding the nuclear weapons capability of India. Another recent report that China is building 2 more fast reactors, which have immediately provoked international concerns about China's possible weapons plutonium production. Opponents of TerraPower believe that India and China will be encouraged in their efforts to develop fast breeder reactors, and they may even want to buy them from Bill Gates. So they also think that characterization of TerraPower as small is a gimmick, and they will have to be made big to make them economical. And the claim that fast reactors are safer than light water reactors has also been called into question. It has been pointed out that US Presidents Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter had made it US policy to discourage the commercializing of plutonium-fueled reactors. They have done that in the past. And President Ford had announced that USA would not support reliance on plutonium fuel and associated reprocessing of spent fuel until the world community can effectively overcome the associated risk of proliferation. So critics do not think that world has reached such at stage, and no one can predict whether the space adventures of Bezos and nuclear venture of Bill Gates will benefit US and wider world. But billionaires have the sixth sense to know how to multiply their own billions. It means at the end of this article, it is saying that whether the ventures of Mr. Bezos and Gates will benefit the world and USA regarding fast breeder reactor, regarding alternate way of technology, which will impact or which will tackle the issues of climate change. So whether it is going to benefit in that way or not. But at the end, they are billionaires. This is their business. So for the profit, they can do anything. So it will multiply their money. So that is end of this article. What is important in this article that you need to fetch out the benefits of nuclear technology, disadvantages of nuclear technology, limitations associated with it, and regarding uranium, plutonium. So these are some of the facts for the prelims point of view, and importance and significance for the mains point of view. Now, next article is about a cycle of low growth, higher inflation. Unless policy action ensures higher demand and growth, India will continue on the path of a K-shaped recovery. What is K-shaped recovery? Basically, K-shaped recovery is that the shape of K. That is, one is growing and another is declining. So K-shaped economy growth is what? That one sector of the economy that is growing and another sector of the economy that is still declining. This is K-shaped recovery. So here this article is talking about that India, if we really want to mitigate or if we really want to work against or work towards increasing our growth. So for that, inflation and low growth, both the things need to be targeted. And unless such policy actions would come that will ensure higher demand and higher growth, India will continue on the path of the K-shaped recovery. So unless these two things will not come, then we will move on the K-shaped path. Okay, so context is what? That recently right-leaning economists have been arguing that government does not need to do anything with the economy and that it will revive by itself. They call those who disagree with them doomsday merchants. These economists reasons that like after Great Depression, the economy rebounded worldwide, so will it with us. It means there is nothing to do for the economic growth. Economy will revive by itself as it had been seen right after Great Depression. So after Great Depression, like economy recovered by its own. So presently or in the recent time or in the present time, economic recovery will take place on its own. Okay, there is no need to do anything. That has been said by economists or experts, economic experts. So argument is fallacious on 4 accounts. There is no facts in it. What are those? First factor is demand. So in that case of, in the case of Great Depression, demand was created by Second World War effort, especially in USA, that was largely spared of the destruction. Its industrial capabilities could be used as a supply base for the entire Allied effort. And presently, there is no war to create demand. So basically, during World War, what happened? The Great Depression came in 1935, and in 1939, Second World War struck. So during war, what happened? Supply chain disrupted, supply chain got disturbed, and because of this, demand of commodities that got increased. Okay, because of that, what happened? Demand increased, supply had disrupted. So because of this, what happened? Economic growth started, or economic recovery started taking place. But here during in the present scenario when COVID-19 world is facing, so there is no war. Okay, no war to create demand. So on the top of it, COVID-19 pandemic had resulted in the demand destruction. So earlier during Great Depression, there was supply destruction, but right now it is demand destruction. So this is because many jobs have been lost, and even where jobs were retained, they had been, or they were getting salaries after deductions. So because of that, demand had been lowered down. So both of these trends were confirmed in the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy and other surveys. The only bright spot in this dismal scenario is that the Western world has spent a lot of money stimulating the economy. And from the point of view of the Indian exporter, rising freight cost and non-availability of containers is a significant impediment, along with structural issues such as strong rupee relative to major competitors. Only Indian IT sectors is placed well to capitalize on rising demand in the world markets. So that was there. Next is what? Inflation. So India is suffering from stagnant growth to low growth in the last 2 quarters. At the best, any growth in the current quarter will be illusionary because it comes on the top of substantial negative growth in the first quarter of last year. It was minus 23.9. That has perpetuated a statistical phenomenon which is known as low base effect. So the base effect states that when measuring year on year over growth, we take the previous year's numbers as the base and measures the growth as a percentage. So in the low initial base set by last year, almost any growth this year is seen as a significant growth percentage. So when we take year on year growth, it means the base year would be last year. Okay. Last year, economic growth was in the negative, minus 23.9. So whatever calculations will be done this year, obviously growth will be shown. Okay. Significant growth percentage will be the result. So comparatively, the absolute growth figure is negligible. This scenario is eerily similar to the early 1970s in the United Kingdom and United States, where low growth had combined with rising inflation. And this is the same situation what India is facing right now. Now, if we talk about causes of inflation in our country, so inflation in India that has been imported through a combination of high commodity prices and high asset price inflation that has been caused by ultra loose monetary policy, which is followed across the globe. And foreign portfolio investors, they have directed a portion of the liquidity towards our markets, which is compared to a developed capital market like which is in the USA. India has a relatively low market capitalization. So it cannot absorb the enormous capital inflow without asset price inflating. And this might be seen as a welcome move, but it is to be noted that most of India's population, they do not want to own, or they are do not owning bonds or equities. That means that they cannot cash in on asset inflation. So wealthy upper class, they get richer because of access to financial assets. Middle and lower middle class, they get destitute because of regressive indirect taxes and high inflation, with their wealth eroding due to inflation. So especially in the case of lower middle class, inflation is lethal as they do not have access to any hard assets. That include most fundamental hard assets like gold. Okay, they do not have these assets to encash. So additionally, supply chain bottlenecks that have contributed to the inflation, which India is seeing right now. So essential goods that have increased in cost because of scarce supply, because of these bottlenecks, which has been caused by COVID-19, and it is reactionary measure enforced. India's issueless taxation policy on fuel has made things worse. Rising fuel prices percolate into the economy by increasing cost of transport. Furthermore, increase in fuel prices will also lead to a rise in wages demanded as monthly expenses of the general public had increased because of too many, because of increasing inflation. So this leads to dangerous cycle of inflation and depleting growth. RBI had chosen to look the other way. It is claiming that this inflation is transitory in nature, while inflationary expenses are entrenched. So inflation is here to stay because RBI is infusing massive liquidity into the system by following an expansionary monetary policy through GSAP or Government Securities Acquisition Program. So this is designed to keep the interest rates of government bonds at 6.0%. And added threat of rising rate is the crowding out of the private sector, which corporates are threatening to do by deleveraging their balance sheets and not investing. Third is what? Interest rate. The only solution for any central banker once he realizes that inflation is entrenched is tightening liquidity and further pushing the cost of money. So if this does not dampen inflation, repo rates will need to go up later this year or early next year. Tightening money supply is painful act. It will threaten to decimate what is left for our economy. Rising interest rate will lead to decrease in aggregate demand in the country that will impact our GDP. So there is less spending by consumers and investments by corporates. Then last is what? Increasing non-performing assets. So rising interest rate, lack of liquidity, and offering credit to leveraged companies instead of direct subsidies to support small and medium-sized enterprises and micro, small and medium enterprises to counter COVID-19 pandemic and its effect will result in increase in the NPA of public sector banks, and it will increase faster. So our small and medium scale sector is also facing Minsky moment. Minsky moment that has been coined by the economist Hyman Minsky, which states that every credit cycle has three distinct stages. What are these? First stage is that of cautious lending and risk aversion by the bankers. Second stage is talking about to lend to trustworthy debtors who can pay the principal and its interest at any point of time. Third stage, stating of euphoria, which is caused by rising asset prices, where bankers lend to debtors regardless of their ability to pay back interest, let alone the principal. It means principal ko chhod do if they are able to pay the interest. Okay, so these are stages, which is called as Minsky moment, which has been coined by Hyman Minsky. So Minsky moment, if we talk about that, marks the decline of asset prices. It causes mass panic and inability of debtors to pay their interest and principal. So India right now, it has reached its Minsky moment where people are not able to pay their interest and principal amount of the loan. So this means that public sector unit and several other banks will need capital in copious amount to make up for bad debt. Several banks and financial institutions had been collapsed in the last 18 months in our country. Union budget is in no position to infuse large amount of capital. At the best, we can expect we can expect a piecemeal effort as in the past 7 years. So as a result of the above causes, credit growth is at a multi-year low of 5.6%, and banks do not want to risk any more loans on their books. So that will further dampen demand for real estate and automobiles once the pent-up demand is over. And Indian economy is in the vicious cycle of low growth and higher inflation unless policy action ensures that high demand and higher growth will be taking place. So in the absence of policy interventions, India will continue on the path of the K-shaped recovery, where large corporates with low debt will prosper at the cost of small and medium sectors. It means large corporates, they are growing on the basis of lower debt, and small and medium sectors, they are declining because they do not have capital left, they do not have earnings so that they can pay out their debts. So this means lower employment, as most of the jobs are created by these small and medium sectors. Lots of people, they are working in these sectors, very few are working in the big corporates. So because of this, what happens? Increase in unemployment will take place. So if unemployment will increase, obviously taxpayers' numbers will get decreased and India's recovery will be shuttered, okay, will be hampered. So that is all about this article. Next is about benefits of breastfeeding. The promotion of breastfeeding should be a continuous process, not an event restricted to a week. Basically, from August 1 to August 7, breastfeeding week had been celebrated. So UNICEF had states on this that breastfeeding is among the most effective ways to protect maternal and child health, and it promotes healthy growth and optimal development in early childhood. Infants, they need to be breastfed within 1 hour of birth, breastfed exclusively for the first 6 months of their lives, and be breastfed after 6 months in the combination with solid, semi-solid, and soft food until they reach at the age of 2 years. Okay, so from 0 to 2 years old child need to be breastfed because it helps to increase or enhance immunity, and immunity will help to fight many diseases. So what are the advantages of breastfeeding? So basically it provides greater immunity, as I've said, for children against infections, allergies, cancer, and obesity, and it also improves brain maturation. It is also beneficial for mother because it promotes faster weight loss after birth. It reduces postpartum bleeding. It protects her against breast cancer, ovarian, and osteoporosis. So data from the Lancet shows that more investment in breastfeeding could add $300 billion to the global economy, and it prevents somewhere 820,000 child deaths every year. Advantages of breast milk are evidence-based, yet globally only 25 to 40% of babies are breastfed. So breastfeeding and later wet nursing were the norms of millions of years. During Renaissance period, breastfeeding came to be seen as unfashionable. feeding bottles and formula milk that were aggressively advertised, that led to a reduction in the breastfeeding between 17th and 19th century. During 19th century, an increase in infant mortality rate and rise in non-communicable diseases during adulthood had been attributed to bottle feeding. That prompted experts and leaders everywhere to push for breastfeeding across the world. So World Alliance for Breastfeeding Action had been established in 1991 that created an awareness about the importance of breastfeeding. Then in 1992, this World Alliance for Breastfeeding Action, in coordination with the UNICEF, introduced World Breastfeeding Week during the first week of August every year, that had been celebrated recently. So India enacted Infant Milk Substitutes, Feeding Bottles, and Infant Foods Act in 1992 with stringent regulations. National Family Health Survey 5 data has shown that there had been a decline in early breastfeeding as many as 12 of the 22 surveyed states and union territories, while the share of institutional births had been increased. But in India, breastfeeding had been supported in different states. So different states have their different programs. Like in Tamil Nadu, what happens, Dravida Munnetra Kazhagam, they promised in their manifesto that maternity leave in Tamil Nadu would be extended to 12 months. And this is essential as women are entering the workforce in large numbers while society had shifted to a nuclear family system. So such a move will ensure uninterrupted breastfeeding. Nevertheless, counseling and educating the parents, establishing breast milk banks, providing lactating mothers with subsidized breast milk pump equipments, setting up exclusive facilities to breastfeed will improve or will prove to be beneficial for mothers to provide exclusive breast milk for children up to 6 months. So the inclusion of husbands in this conversation is incumbent. Both the mother and newborn are vulnerable for first 12 weeks. Getting used to breastfeeding takes at least 14 days. Therefore, assistance from the partner is indispensable during that time. And Indian law is only allowing 15 days for the paternity leave. So it is imperative to extend this leave at least for 12 to 16 weeks. So if we talk about India's allocation on health, so India is a low middle income country with a meager allocation of GDP towards health. Communicable and non-communicable diseases are hampering our economic growth. So the theme for the World Breastfeeding Week this year is to protect breastfeeding, a shared responsibility. And with the change in social, cultural, and environmental factors, breastfeeding is no longer mother-specific or mother-centric. Governments must allocate specific funds rigorously. They should implement the law, invest in educating parents and health workers, which involve civil society organizations and media in spreading the awareness. Breastfeeding had decreased during COVID-19 pandemic, so awareness need to be given so that breastfeeding could be promoted. So therefore, it is important that the promotion of breastfeeding should be a continuous process, not an event which is restricted to a week. That is all about this article. Next is what disconcerting picture behind the headline numbers. There is an evidence to suggest that this PLFS, that is periodic labor force survey data, may underestimate the loss of earnings and fall in consumption. Yeah. So the third annual round of periodic labor force survey data had conducted in the month of July 2019 to June 2020, and it has been released recently. So this survey had captured some key indicators of the labor market, like labor force participation rate, proportion of population working or seeking work, worker population ratio, proportion of population that is working. and unemployment rate, that is proportion of population in the labor force. So these are seeking but unable to find work. So it also provides data on the earnings of different segments of the workers. So this PLFS 2019-20 was expected to provide official estimates of the labor market distress that followed dwindling GDP growth and a lockdown which is following the novel coronavirus pandemic that brought several economic activities to a standstill. So data had shown a decline in the unemployment rate to 4.8% in 2019-20, which is lowest in 3 years. So headline numbers may seem pleasing. A detailed analysis is painting a rather disconcerting picture. What are these? So as we know that during COVID-19, many people have lost their jobs. So the impact can be seen in this survey. So labor force participation rate, worker population ratio, unemployment rate are measured using two approaches. These are usual status and current weekly status. So usual status that considers the activity of an individual over a relatively long period during last 365 days, whereas current weekly status is based on activity that has been performed during reference period of the last 7 days. Unemployment rate, which is measured by usual status, that has fallen from 6.1% that was there in 2017, 17-18 to 4.8% in 2019-20. So that is because of labor force participation rate had increased from 36.9% to 40.1%, and worker population ratio had also been increased from 34.7% to 38.2% during the same period. It means during 1920. During 2017 to 18. So in the other words, there was an increase in the share of the population in the labor force over the last 3 years. And there was an even higher increase in the share of those who were able to find work, and unemployment has fallen down. So a fall in the unemployment rate would be heartening, except it seems puzzling as it comes at the time of unprecedented economic distress. Quarterly GDP growth had declined for successive quarters. That had slided from 8.2% in January to March 2018 to 3.1% in January to March 2020, after which economic contracted by 23.9% during April to June 2020 quarter. That was in quarter first of the last year. So how were more people able to find jobs when economic activities were slowing down? So answer lies in the changing composition of workforce. How? Basically, what happened? Urban laborers, they lost their jobs in the urban centers. They moved to rural areas, and there they found another work that is under Manrega or some household workers, some temporary construction works. So periodic labor force survey had categorized the workforce into self-employed, that includes own account workers, employers, and unpaid helpers in the family enterprises. Then regular wages or salaried workers and casual laborers. So casual laborers, they were self-employed, they were regular wages or salaried workers. So own account workers, they run small enterprises without hiring any labor, but they may take help from family members, while employers hire workers. Of all the worker categories, only the proportion of unpaid family workers has gone up significantly in the last 3 years. And in this fact, between 2018 and 19, the workforce had increased by 2.9%, and proportion of all other employment categories in the workforce had been declined, except unpaid family helpers. In the same period, the entire rise in the workforce had been accommodated by agriculture, because agriculture subsumed these many of the unemployed. So it continues to perform a function of a sink, that absorbing the workforce that cannot find remunerative employment elsewhere. Then there is also gendered dimension to the changing composition of the workforce. The category of the unpaid family worker is dominated by women. Story of declining unemployment rate can largely be explained by a movement of women from primarily being engaged in domestic work to agriculture and other petty production activities as unpaid family helpers, possibly in the hope of increasing family income in the times of unprecedented distress and lack of alternative employment opportunities. So in that situation, they have joined their family businesses or family enterprises. So usual status is based on a loose definition of work that underestimates open unemployment, and that is where the alternative measures of the unemployment is relevant. By using current weekly status approach, the unemployment rate was estimated to be 8.8% unchanged. That is unchanged during the last 3 years. So periodic labor force survey for April to June 2020 had been overlapping with the national lockdown. Current weekly status unemployment rate in this quarter was 14% and urban unemployment rate was around 20%. Corrected for inflation, the average monthly income for the salaried had been increased by 2% in April-June 2020 over April-June 2019. Monthly earnings of the self-employed that also declined by 16%, and daily wage for casual workers declined by 5.6% over the same period. Real monthly per capita consumer expenditure had also been declined by 7.6%. So rise in the average income of salaried workers and muted impact of impact on consumer expenditure as estimated from the periodic labor force survey do not concur with other data for the lockdown period. Private final consumption expenditure that had been declined by 26.7% in April-June 2020 over the same quarter in 2019. Numerous small-scale surveys also reported massive earnings lost during the lockdown, and there is overwhelming evidence to suggest that periodic labor force survey data may underestimate the loss of earnings and fall in consumption during the lockdown. That is a missed opportunity for the official survey to capture labor market dynamics during the lockdown period. So there is no official data on poverty after 2011 and 12 or on farm income after 2013, and no recent data on migrant workers. While the consumer expenditure data for 2017 and 18 was buried, and the data on situation assessment of agricultural households are not yet released, despite being conducted between January-December 2019 before the latest periodic labor force survey data had come. Minor tweaks in the future periodic labor force survey can fill the data gaps. Currently, this survey has captured incomes from agriculture and monthly consumer expenditure, but the questions on these aspects lack credibility. Predecessors of this periodic labor force survey, National Sample Survey, was there. So its survey on unemployment and employment surveys had collected data on consumer expenditure by using a detailed schedule. There was no reason why PLFS or periodic labor force survey cannot do the same. By adding questions on the cost and returns from the cultivation and related activities can also capture more accurate data on agricultural incomes. Lengthening the questionnaire has its cost, but the cost of the absence of reliable and timely data on important policy relevant indicators are far higher. It means the real picture cannot be shown if data is lacking, and that had been seen in periodic labor force survey. So as a whole, if we talk about, so lots of things had been find out that unemployment rate had been filled up, but how? By diverting the unemployed in different sectors, that was self-employed or salaried or regular salaried or regular wages or casual laborers. So they have diverted to different fields basically, and data had been lacking. So we cannot predict what the real picture is regarding unemployment ratio, regarding people who lost their jobs, regarding labor force participation rate and worker population ratio. So there is lacking in data as a whole. Now, next article is what? Criminalizing welfare issues before the legislature adopts coercive legal measures. A welfare response should be considered. This article is talking about that if any welfare measure need to be taken, there is no need to criminalize it. What is the meaning of it? Basically, we'll discuss that in the details in the article. For example, if we talk about its context, so Supreme Court has said recently or issued a notice recently on a writ petition on the condition that the petition spreads seeking a direction to restrain beggars and vagabonds or homeless from begging in traffic junctions, markets, and public places to avoid the spread of COVID-19 pandemic in all the states and union territories all across India, to be modified to focus on rehabilitation to those forced to beg for a living. Basically, the context of this article is what, that recently some person, they have filed a writ petition in Supreme Court, and in that writ petition it has been said that Supreme Court need to take a strict action against those people who are in the begging institutions, who are beggars. So Supreme Court need to take strict actions against them. Why? Because these beggars on traffic junctions, markets, or public places, they need to be avoided, because they are basically behind the spread of COVID-19 pandemic across all such states and union territories. So Supreme Court has said that how they are normal human being, and how we can say that they are the spreader of COVID-19 pandemic. So this petition need to be modified, and that need to focus. So here begging cannot be criminalized. Okay, so Supreme Court had said that begging cannot be criminalized. So here what the petitioner can do, they can change the subject, it can be modified, and it should focus on the rehabilitation of those who are forced to beg for a living. That should be the modified petition, and then Supreme Court can do on anything on this. So in doing this, the court rightly observed that being compelled to beg was a socio-economic issue, and it cannot be remedied by directions of the kind of originally sought. Basically, Supreme Court has said that begging is a socio-economic issue. So criminalizing begging cannot be, it is not a remedy. Basically, if it will be criminalized, then beggars, if begging will be criminalized, and there are various other issues involved in the begging. So begging cannot be criminalized in that situation, because this is a socio-economic problem. People are not into begging because of their choice. This is their compulsion. They do not have any right to livelihood, which is our fundamental right. So in the absence of livelihood, what they do, without any option, they go for begging. So it cannot be criminalized. So it requires a welfare response from the state. It means state government need to do which. This order points to a largely ignored nexus between coercive measures and welfare issues, which can be a useful guide to making and implementing criminal laws in 3 ways. What are those? So first is when decisions about criminalizing are being taken by the legislature, an important point of consideration should be whether the issue sought to be addressed might be better suited to a welfare response. Salient example of welfare issues against which the coercive force of criminal law had inspired been deployed serve to illustrate the point. In holding criminalization of beggary under Bombay Prevention of Begging Act 1959 that has been taken place, that extended to NCT of Delhi as unconstitutional. High Court of Delhi in Harsh Mandir and another versus Union of India 2018 had notified that criminalization of beggary served only to invisible beggars without doing anything to address the structural deprivations that drove people to beg. Similarly, criminalization of triple talaq by Muslim women under Protection of Rights on Marriage Act 2019, that had purported to protect Muslim women, does nothing to address the structural gender inequality, social stigma, poor employment options, and lack of state support, which actually causes the deprivations associated with the divorce, and not just with the triple talaq. Basically, if we talk about triple talaq issue is not regarding triple talaq issue. So triple talaq had been criminalized. So criminalizing triple talaq is not a solution. Why it is not a solution? Because the ultimate sufferer is women. Ultimate sufferer of the triple talaq is women, because most of the Muslim women, they are uneducated. So criminalizing this act is not a solution. Why? Because if they really want to do, or if state really want to take some welfare measure, then what they need to do, they need to do something which can do or which can address the structural gender inequality. Okay, the structural gender inequality which is prevailing in among the Muslim women, that need to be addressed. Social stigma which is associated with the talaq, that need to be removed. Poor employment options among Muslim women, that need to be worked upon. Lack of state support that need to be addressed. So that these are actually causes the deprivation associates with the divorce. So what all deprivations are associated with the divorce that need to be addressed by the state government and the central government. Then only we can think that welfare measures had been taken place. So criminalization is not a solution, not an answer. Second, socio-economic marginalization and poverty may frequently make people susceptible to exploitation, whether through poorly paid or unpaid labor, trafficking and sex work, or indeed begging. Basically, these issues are socio-economic issues. Okay, those people who are living in poverty, who are marginalized population or section of the population, they are facing socio-economic issues or challenges. So here they become frequent, or these peoples, they are frequently making these people susceptible to exploitation. It means these marginalized and poor people, they become prone to these type of exploitation, whether they are poorly paid or unpaid laborers. Okay, they have to they become bonded laborers, you can say. They fell into the trap of trafficking and sex work, or in the worst case, begging. So criminal response to those who are seeking to take advantage of such vulnerability, but never the vulnerable themselves, might be appropriate, but it would amount to little more than lip service to the predicament of the exploited without accompanying welfare measures. In other words, it is important to ensure that pimps, brothel owners, and traffickers are held criminally liable for sexually exploiting a person. So here, beggars and sex workers or trafficked persons, they do not need to be criminalized. Okay, they do not need to be criminalized. But who need to be criminalized? The people who are involved in these activities, who force those poor and marginalized sections of the society into or forced into these works, like pimps, brothel owners, traffickers. They need to be held criminally liable for sexually exploiting a person. Equally important is to create alternative, well-paying and dignified employment, to make such employment accessible by imparting requisite education and skills, and to have social security nets to ensure that no person feels that sex work is their least worst option. So here it is important that governments need to do something for them. They need to come with the alternative that is a well-paying and dignified employment for them. They need to make such employment accessible by imparting requisite education and skills. They need to give social security. They need to come under social security nets, so that they can ensure that no person should feel that they have nothing to do. So now they have only work that they had to go again back to sex work. Okay, so this is essential not only to prevent exploitative practices, but also to rehabilitate those who have been rescued, and or those who would like an exit option from such practices. So those people who had been rehabilitated, those people who want to come out of these traps, so there they need to, or government need to provide alternatives to them. Okay, to rescue a sex worker is meaningless unless they have a legitimate way out of such work, an option that is materially, not morally, better for them. So better options need to be given to those people who had come out, or who wants to come out of these illegal practices. So focusing on welfare aspect of exploitative practices also sheds light on the structural forms of the impoverishment, and on who is most likely to be exploited as a result. It is thus largely those marginalized and discriminated against based on gender, caste, class, and even age, who occupy a rank of beggars, sex workers, bonded laborers, and child laborers. So focus should also be on exposing the culpability of the state and society in creating or enabling the vulnerabilities of those who are prone to exploitation. The recognition is reflected in the apt remarks of the High Court in Suhail Rashid Bhatt versus State of Jammu and Kashmir and others in 2019, where begging, it was said by High Court that begging is also a fact evidence of the failure of the government as well as the society at large to protect its citizens from debilitating effects of extreme poverty, and to ensure to them basics of food, clothing, shelter, health, education, essentially concomitants of the rights to life, which is ensured under Article 21 of the Constitution of India. So that had been said by High Court of Jammu and Kashmir. in 2019. So what is the accountability of state in these matters? Finally, when evaluating the function or necessity of a criminalization response to something that is essentially or even partly a welfare issue, which is crucial to a question whose interest the law does and in fact who is serving. So does it help the vulnerable or the exploited, or is it a tool of persecution, or does it cater to the morality and sensibility of the powerful? Does it hide the failures of the state, or is it a quick fix that allows the government to abdicate and divert attention away from its welfare responsibilities? Only by following these interests, we as a citizen can hope to hold the state accountable in its use of power to criminalize conduct. So criminalization of welfare activities is not a solution, but what is the solution? Solution is the required action that need to be taken: education, imparting education and skills, imparting employment opportunity, providing dignified life to them. And how dignified life could be given? By providing jobs to them, to those people who are being rehabilitated out of begging, out of sexual working, out of trafficking. So some alternate and better options need to be given to these people. So this is all about this article. Next is about making a case for Indo-Abrahamic Accord. What is Abrahamic Accord or Abraham Accord? Basically, Abraham is considered as a religious head of Christian and Jews. Okay, so this Abrahamic Accord, if we talk about, so it is what it was: a joint statement between Israel, United Arab Emirates, and United States that came in 2020. Okay, so in this Abrahamic Accord, these countries basically they came into an agreement that these are those Arab countries who are who wants to come together on the platform so that they can provide peace to the world. They can provide they can have diplomatic relations among themselves, which will provide normalization between UAE and Israel. So agreement had been taken place between UAE, Israel, Bahrain, okay, and USA in 2020. So basically, these countries who are part of this. They are what they are. Sorry. So these countries who are part of this Abraham Accord, they regards Abraham as the religious head, and which is very dignified position. And another thing is that these are Arab countries. Okay, so here they have something common among them, and that is why they came in this accord. So context is what that Egyptian scholar who is Muhammad Suleiman. So he recently had written about significance of what he calls the emerging Indo-Abrahamic Accord. So Indo-Abrahamic Accord is what that all such countries who are part of Abrahamic Accord. Now, these countries can have a tie-up, have a collaboration of India, and a trans-regional implications of the to the west of India can also be seen if India will become part of this Abrahamic Accord. Okay, so India's importance can be seen in eastern, let's say east of India, and if Indo-Abrahamic Accord would take place, then what would happen? India's importance would also be seen in the west of India. So Suleiman's concept builds on the normalization of Israel's relations with UAE and Bahrain under the so-called Abraham Accord that has been signed in August 2020 in Washington. This accord had been named, or inspiration of this name had been a choice to denote the shared origin of the Jewish and Islamic religions. They consider Abraham as their religious head. So UAE and Bahrain were followed by Sudan and Morocco in signing the Abraham Accords. So if we talk about cooperation, so Egypt in 1979 and Jordan in 1994 had already established diplomatic relations with Israel. And Abraham Accords widely seen as making a definitive breakthrough in the relations between Israel and Arabs. Suleiman is seeing the Israel-UAE relations as having acquired a character which is independent of Israel's relations with Palestine. Because of Israel and Palestine issues, these countries earlier, they were not having good relations. But later on, gradually, like Egypt in 1979, Jordan in 1994, they formed a tie-up, or they formed diplomatic relations with Israel by looking out the exact position, or by looking out the exact situation between Israel and Palestine. And they also promised expansive political, economic, and technological cooperations among the countries. Solomon points to the transformation of India's relationship with the UAE, India and UAE having good diplomatic relations, and Israel as well. So India and Israel, India and UAE, we can see after 2014, the diplomatic relations has strengthened. So Delhi had relations with Abu Dhabi and Tel Aviv, that is UAE and Israel, for many years, and they certainly have acquired political depth and strategic character under present government. So Solomon is seeing that this trilateral relationship has the potential nucleus of a wider regional coalition. Solomon also points to the transformation of India's relations with UAE and Israel under Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Delhi has relations with Abu Dhabi and Tel Aviv for many years, and they certainly have acquired political depth and strategic character under Modi. Solomon is also seeing trilateral relationship as the potential nucleus of the wider regional coalition. And he also underlies that converging interest between India and UAE and Israel amid Turkish President Erdogan's assertive claims for the leadership of the Islamic world. Basically, if we talk about Turkey, Turkey is the common enemy of all these. Okay, Israel, UAE, India. Why? Because most of the time had been seen that Turkey takes the side of Pakistan, which talks about Islamic Brotherhood. So these Arab world, these Arab countries, they are not or emphasizing on Islamic or Islamic Brotherhood, but they are emphasizing on the what's say common brotherhood. So Turkey is the common issue among these. So new geopolitical churn is also driven by Pakistan's growing alignment with Turkey and its alienation from its traditionally strong supporters in the Arab Gulf, that is UAE and Saudi Arabia. And fragile efforts since the end of Cold War at normalizing relations between Delhi and Ankara had also broken down, and because of Erdogan's hostility towards India. So Erdogan, that is Turkish president, so he had been championing Pakistan's case on Kashmir after India changed its territorial status quo in the state of the state in 2019 after abrogation of Article 370. So Pakistan's behest, Turkey is also blocking India's entry into the nuclear supply group. So along with criticizing India's action of abrogating Article 370, Turkey is also creating a blockage towards India's membership into NSG, nuclear supplier group. So Turkey's quest for regional dominance has also widened the Indo-Abrahamic convergence to the Eastern Mediterranean to include Greece and Cyprus. So Greece and Cyprus can also be part of this Abraham Accord, and discovery of new hydrocarbon resources in Eastern Mediterranean had renewed the territorial disputes between Ankara and Athens, that is Turkey and Greece. And Turkish quest for regional dominance has drawn Greece and UAE closer. So because of dominance in Mediterranean or Eastern Mediterranean Sea, issues had been seen, or clashes had been seen between Greece and Turkey. So Turkey become a common problem for Greece as well. So here Greece and Cyprus can also be part of Abraham Accord, can also be extended to Greece and Cyprus. So by doing this, expansion of this Abrahamic Accord can be taken place. India can also be part of this. So, so this incident of Eastern Mediterranean region issue between Greece and Turkey had tried to come closer, or had tried to, regional dominance had drawn Greece and UAE to come closer. So Greece is also looking towards India to enhance its bilateral security cooperation. India's External Affairs Minister, Subramaniam Jaishankar, he was in Greece and in Athens at the end of June, and two sides had begun defense exchanges. So Greece's European partner like France have big stake in Mediterranean as well as Arab Gulf, and they have taken an active interest in countering Turkey's regional ambitions. Many in India will shake their heads in disapproval at the framing of India's Middle East possibilities in religious terms. But the idea has considerable traction among groups that are otherwise deeply antagonistic. Like many in Pakistan have also convinced themselves of a Hindu Yahudi conspiracy to undermine its very extensive. They could throw in the Greeks and add Christianity to the conspiracy. Those in India, they view the Middle East through the religious prism, might believe Hindus and Jews are natural allies in the region. But the deepening of Indian and Israeli ties with moderate Arab states spoils the religious paradigm that so many in India and Pakistan would love to believe that. So idea of Indo-Abrahamic Accord also troubles those in South Asia who view Middle East through such secular tropes as anti-imperialism and contradiction between Israel and Arab. Intra-regional contradiction in West Asia have also been sharper than those between the region and the external powers. Arabs do empathize with Palestine's plight, but many of them are no longer willing to let the Palestinians veto their normalization of relations with Israel. Nor do all Arabs see the conflict with Israel as the principal contradiction in the region. For some non-Arab powers like Iran and Turkey, they pose a bigger threat than in Israel. So they view region either exclusively through the religious or secular lenses that misses the complex interplay between competing versions of a common faith, quest for profit, and diverging political interest within the region. Turkey's president supported for the Muslim Brotherhood that seeks to overthrow the current political order in the region that has deeply angered the government of Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. Fighting the Brotherhood and balancing Turkey have become existential challenges for Cairo, Riyadh, and Abu Dhabi. Although Turkey's president, Islamic radicalism might appeal to the Arab street, Arab elites are not about to let Erdogans reimpose the Ottoman Imperium over their lands. Now, towards a formal coalition. So, as the current turmoil that has reconfigured the region's geography, its traditional subdivision into the Gulf, West Asia, and North Africa, that has made little sense today. And nor can the region be separated from Southern Europe and Mediterranean at one end and the subcontinent on the other. The familiar regional institutions like Arab League and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation might endure but are incapable of addressing the region's contradictions. One of the unintended consequences of the Erdogan's overweening regional ambition, his alienation of Israel as well as moderate Arabs, his conflict with Greece, and his embrace of Pakistan is the extraordinary opportunity for Delhi to widen India's reach to the west of the subcontinent. Solomons asks if the deepening engagement between India and UAE and Israel can be converted into a formal coalition. To make sure there are many areas like defense, aerospace, and digital innovations where these three countries can pool their resources and coordinate development policies. Coordination with Saudi Arabia will certainly remain a high priority for the three countries. And meanwhile, other countries like Greece are also eager to greater cooperation with the coalition. And if there is one country that can give substantive depth to the Indo-Abrahamic Accord is the Egypt. Having ousted Muslim Brotherhood from power in 2014, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi is trying to revitalize the nation's economy and reclaim its regional leadership role. So located at the cusp of the Mediterranean, Europe, Africa, and Asia, Egypt is the very heart of the greater Middle East. So independent India's engagement with the region in the 1950s was centered on a close partnership with Egypt. The legendary special relationship between Jawaharlal Nehru and Gamal Abdel Nasser was instrumental in promoting Afro-Asian unity and founding the non-alignment movement. So that was not all about solidarity, though. Nehru and Nasser, they visualized a strategic partnership and they sought to build a joint fighter aircraft and develop a jet engine. So if Delhi and Cairo had lost each other in recent decades, Modi can rebuild the strategic partnership jointly with LCC, who is calling for the reconstruction of a new republic in Egypt. Opportunities that are coming India's ways to the west and subcontinent are as consequential as those that have recently emerged in the east. Much in the manner that Indo-Pacific has transformed the way India is thinking about the east, and the notion of Great Middle East can provide a huge fillip to India's engagement with the extended neighborhood to the west. So India's importance, as I've said, that had increased in the east of India. It means in the Indo-Pacific region. So now by doing this, by having collaboration with the Abraham, those countries who are part of Abraham Accord, India can show its importance in the west of India, okay, in the extended neighborhood to the west. So that will basically strengthen its position in the world, or in the among the world platform. So that is all about this article. Next article is about poverty in India is on the rise again. In the absence of CES data, periodic labor force survey had shown a rise in the absolute number of poor. Basically, as we have discussed one article regarding periodic labor force survey, which has shown that unemployment ratio or employment ratio had been improved. And how it has been improved? It has improved on the basis of diversion of unemployed in the different sectors. But it has been discussed that there was lack of data of the current year regarding migrant labor. So there is lacking in data. So this article basically is talking about that as per the periodic labor force survey, it has been found that number of absolute poor had been increased. What are these? We'll talk about it. So India had not released its consumption expenditure survey data since 2011 and 12. And this consumption expenditure survey is being conducted by the National Sample Survey Office every 5 years. But this consumption expenditure survey of 2017-18, which had been conducted a year late, was not made public by the government of India. So a new consumption expenditure survey is likely to be conducted in 2021-22, the data from which will probably not be available before the end of 2022. Meanwhile, our economy has been slowing for the 9 quarters prior to the outbreak of the novel corona pandemic. Unemployment had reached a 45-year high in 2017 and 18, as revealed by the NSO's periodic labor force survey. So India's labor force surveys, including 5-year unemployment rounds from 1973 to 1974 to 2011 and 12, have also collected consumption expenditure of households. And periodic labor force survey had enabled any careful researcher to estimate the incidence of poverty, that is the share in the total population of those who are below the poverty line, as well as the total number of persons who are below the poverty line. So there is a clear trajectory of the incidence of poverty that is falling from 1973 to 2012. In this fact, since India began collecting data on poverty, the incidence of poverty had always fallen. That was 54.9% in 1973-74. Then it declined to 44.5% in 1983-84. Then it declined to 36% in 1993-94 and 27.5% in 2004 and 2005. So this was in accordance with the Lakdawala poverty line, which was lower than the Tendulkar poverty line, the then member of the Planning Commission. Now, different methodology had been used to estimate labors. Like in 2011, it had been decided in the Planning Commission that national poverty line will be raised in accordance with the recommendations of an expert group chaired by late Suresh Tendulkar. He was professor of economics at Delhi School of Economics. So if it happens, this poverty line was comparable at that time to the international poverty line that has been estimated by World Bank. That was of $1.09 that has been raised to $1.90 to account for inflation persons per day. So based on the Tendulkar poverty line, poverty estimates for 2004 and 5 and 11 and 12 are to be found in the Planning Commission's own estimates by using consumption expenditure survey of those years. Hence, 2011-12 poverty line was extended for each state, and it used the consumption expenditure reported by periodic labor force survey, which estimated a consistent poverty head count ratio, that is the incidence of poverty in the population, as well as absolute number of poor. So here we feel confident about using periodic labor force survey because in the absence of consumption expenditure survey data, periodic labor force survey can be used to estimate the incidence of poverty. So it collects household monthly per capita consumption expenditure based on the mixed recall period methodology. Similar to consumption expenditure survey, periodic labor force survey annual report had come in 2019-20. Also asked the household questions about expenses on health, clothing and bedding, education, footwear, consumer durables for a 365-day recall period. that is prior to the day of the survey. But for non-durable consumption goods and services that include expenses on food, housing, and conveyance, etc., its question expects a recall period of 30 days prior to the data of survey. So Tendulkar poverty line was updated naturally by using consumer price index for each state to 2019-20 to arrive at the estimate for the last year before COVID-19. So what is stunning is that for the first time in India's history of estimating poverty, there is a rise in the incidence of poverty since 2011-12. The important point is that it is consistent with the NSO's consumption expenditure survey data for 2017-18 that had been leaked. So leaked data showed that rural consumption between 2011 and 18 had fallen by 8%, while urban consumption had risen by barely 2%. So since the majority of India's population, certainly over 65% is is rural, poverty in India is also predominantly rural. Remarkably, by 2019-20, poverty had increased significantly in both the rural and urban areas, but much more in the rural areas. It was from 25% to 30%. It means it has increased by 5%. So it is also for the first time since the estimation of poverty that began in India on the consistent basis that absolute number of poor had increased from 217 million in 2012 to 217 million in 2019-20 in rural areas, and from 53 million to 71 million in urban areas, or a total increase of the absolute poor of about 70 million. So that is important here to recall two facts between 1973 and 1993. That is, the absolute number of poor had remained constant. That was about 320 million poor, despite a significant increase in the India's total population. So between 93 and 2004, absolute number of poor had fallen by a marginal number from 320 million to 302 million between the period when GDP growth rate had picked up after the economic reforms. It means after 1991. So that was for the first time in India's history since consumption expenditure survey had begun that we have seen an increase in the absolute numbers of the poor between 2012-13 and 19-20. Second fact is that for the first time ever between 2004-5 and 11-12, the number of poor had fallen, that too by a staggering 133 million, or by over 19 million per year. So this was accounted for by what has come to be called as India's dream run of growth over 2004 and 2014. GDP growth rate had averaged 8% per annum. That was a 10-year run that was not sustained thereafter. And in that contrast, not only has the incidence of poverty that increased since then, but the absolute increase in poverty is totally unprecedented. Now, what are the reasons of increasing poverty? So reason of increased poverty since 2013 are not far to seek. While the economy maintained some growth momentum till 2015, monumental blunder of demonetization followed by poorly planned and hurriedly introduced GST both delivered body blows to the unorganized sectors and micro, small and medium enterprises. So economic slowdown followed after this. None of the four engines of growth was firing after that. Private investments that fell from 31% inherited by new government to 28% of GDP by 2019-20. Public expenditure was constrained by a silent fiscal crisis. Exports, which had never fallen in absolute dollar terms for a quarter century since 1991, actually fell below 2013-14 level of $315 billion for 5 years. Consumption had stagnated, household savings rates had fallen down, joblessness increased to 45-year high by 2017-18 by the usual status, and youth between 15 to 29 years of age, they saw unemployment triple from 6% to 18% between 2012 and 2018. Real wages that did not increase for casual or regular workers over the same period, hardly surprising when job seekers were increasing, but jobs were not at anywhere close to that rate. Hence, consumption expenditure had fallen and poverty had increased. So poverty is expected to rise further during COVID-19 pandemic after the economy has contracted. So that is all about this article. Moving on to the next one. Getting back in business in the Indo-Pacific, the choreographed visit of 3 senior US officials are a part of the Biden administration's deliberate strategic refocus. Basically, this article is regarding the functions or the business in Indo-Pacific region, as three officials had come under the newly administered USA government. So what are the importance of these visits in India? So USA President Joe Biden executed a bold diplomatic outreach to the Indo-Pacific region last month through carefully choreographed visits of his three top officials. That was Deputy Secretary, Secretary of Defense, and Secretary of State. So this is a part of a deliberate strategic refocus away from the 20 years of Afghanistan and Iraq and towards maritime Asia, where COVID-19, climate change, and China are the compelling challenges. So assessing what the three American dignitaries sought and actually achieved is instructive in order to appreciate the impressive sweep of diplomacy and military strength of the world's top power, USA. Their discussions would surely mold the geopolitical equations in the region. Now, so yeah, so Deputy Secretary visit had taken place in July 1927. So that was probably, July 19 to 27. So that was probably the most complex since it covered not only Japan, South Korea, and Mongolia, but also China. So throughout her trip, she reaffirmed the US commitment to working with allies and partners for the promotion of peace and prosperity and upholding a rule-based order, the code word critical of China's behavior. Her discussions with Japanese Vice Foreign Minister Mori Taki that covered not only present state of Japan-US alliance, but also other issues that including Myanmar and COVID-19. In this addition, she had participated in a trilateral meeting that involved Japan and South Korea in a bid to smoothen tensions afflicting the two East Asian neighbors. Then she visited Ulaanbaatar, and she became the highest US dignitary to visit Mongolia since 2016. Despite its close relationship with Beijing, Mongolia looks for devices to assert its independence. So opportunity to discuss its needs and concerns with the new administration was valuable. In Tianjin, China, she held discussions with Vice Foreign Minister Lei Yechung, her counterpart, and also she received by Foreign Minister Wang Yi. Her main mission was to convey that US welcomed competition but did not see confrontation with China. And she also discussed forthrightly the dismal human rights situation in Xinjiang and logistics for a possible Biden-Xi Jinping meeting at G20 meeting in Rome in October this year. So visit by Mr. Austin. Mr. Austin is what? He is Secretary of he is Secretary of Defense, Austin III. So he covered three important ASEAN member states, that was Singapore, Vietnam, and Philippines. That turned out to be the most productive in that it reiterated the necessity for a US military presence in the region. As Pentagon Chief, Mr. Austin, Secretary of Defense, is heard with attention, particularly when he speaks with the candor of a veteran general. Beijing's claims to the vast majority of the South China Sea has no basis in international law, he aptly asserted while delivering the Fullerton lecture on July 27. He listed China's other objectionable actions that including aggression against India, and then he sent out the key signal to China: we will not flinch when our interests are threatened, yet we do not seek confrontation. So that seems to have resonated, that that his discussions with leaders of the three countries went off exceptionally well. In a joint statement, Singapore and USA agreed that America's presence in the region is vital for its peace, prosperity, and stability. USA side appreciated Singapore's logistical support to US military aircraft and vessels, while Singapore benefits from the arrangement of an Air Force fighter training detachment hosted in Guam, as well as now new training facilities that is inside the US. Singapore could modulate its current inclination to move closer to China. So Mr. Austin encouraged Vietnam to develop close defense cooperation with the USA. A new memorandum of understanding had been signed to resolve the war legacy that has been issued by creating a database to accelerate the search for those still missing and in action. So his visit to Singapore and Vietnam will be followed shortly by US Vice President Kamala Harris. Philippines leg produced a notable result as Manila had agreed to full restoration of the Visiting Forces Agreement that provides a legal foundation for the US military presence in that country. Now, Mr. Blinken's trip, that is Secretary of State. So his visit to Delhi and Kuwait drew attention for its positive outcomes. India visit was more in the nature of a consultative, confirmatory dialogue rather than one that results in signing of new agreements. It means no new agreement had been signed. It was just a consultative and confirmatory dialogue between India and USA. So his discussions with Prime Minister, National Security Advisor, and External Affairs Minister that brought out clearly that areas of convergence between the two nations are expanding and the areas of divergence are shrinking. His repeated observations that the friendship with India is one of the closest that USA has was music to Indian ears. On Afghanistan, the proximity of perceptions was emphasized, although this did not conceal the differences in their perspectives. On the Indo-Pacific, the convergence was clear, with the two foreign ministers were agreeing to cooperate on a range of geopolitical and geo-economic issues without uttering the C word, that is China word, even once in their smoothly managed joint press conference. So by clarifying that Quad was not a military alliance, he spoke the truth, tipping his hat to India's strategic autonomy in the Indo-Pacific region. He defined Quad as a four like-minded countries coming together to work collectively on regional challenges while reinforcing international rules and values. Now, what are the key takeaways from the visit? So first is what America's China policy and rest of the Indo-Pacific policy will run in tandem with inner consistency ensured by Mr. Biden. Secondly, Washington maintains a tough attitude towards China, but it desires to keep the doors open for dialogue. The relationship with China is marked by three characteristics, that is adversarial, competitive, and cooperative, and it is likely to stay the way. Third, USA is willing to resist and counter China firmly, but with the full engagement of and contribution by the like-minded states of the region. Therefore, Mr. Austin's exposition of integrated deterrence defined as using every military and non-military tool in our toolbox in lockstep with our allies and partners, that assumes significance. In short, USA is backed and is willing to lead, but region will have to seriously step up to and participate actively to maintain peace and prosperity. And here, Asia can ill afford to be a recipient by standard. That is all about this article. Moving on to the next. Wait a moment. A grand tax bargain in danger of coming apart. GST version 2.0 may have to be designed soon given the flaws in the existing structure. It means some restructuring needs to be taken place in goods and services tax. Context is that after 4 years, the promise of GST remains substantially unrealized, and it is a far cry from the attempted avoidance of cascading and continues to be not very transparent multi-rate system that is associated with difficulties in computing and assessing tax liability, tax burden, and tax incidence. States have less headroom in handling GST collection shortfall after surrendering their fiscal autonomy. And when the period of 5 years of compensation, which is ending in 2022, will we see a continued flawed system or a freshly minted GST 2.0, given the asymmetry of the power equations between states and center? So here, basically, this article is criticizing the implementation of GST, which had many loopholes. Like it was said that it will remove the cascading effect of taxation, but still it has nothing has been removed, nothing has been resolved. Then it is multi-rate system. So one nation, one tax, it is somewhere fallen down. Okay, it is somewhere not fulfilling its words. Then compensation had been promised for 5 years. Now it is 4 years past of GST implementation. So a state compensation has not been given. State has lost its fiscal autonomy to central government after implementation of GST. So that has to be resolved. So what we will see in the after the completion of 5 years in 2022, whether we are going to see a newly restructured GST or the continuation of the same. So GST is correlated to GDP. So tax base of GST does not appear to be expanding as the recent uptick had reversed last month. GST is strongly correlated to overall GDP. Basically, revenue collection of the GST is dependent on the nominal growth rate of gross added value added in the economy. So since its inception in 2017, gross value added per quarter had been between rupees 40 lakh crore to 47 lakh crore, and GST revenue had not been higher than 2.7 lakh crore to 3.1 lakh crore. So tax to gross value addition is only about 5% to 6.5%, though gross value addition growth was much higher. Obviously, a very large segment is covered by exemption, composition schemes, evasion, and lower tax rate. Now, fundamental weakness of GST is its political architecture that is asymmetrically loaded in the favor of the center. Disputes between states and between the center and states are inevitable and in a mosaic arrangement. But in the current structure, no particular body is tasked to adjudicate this, though the original constitution, that is 105th Amendment Bill 2011 regarding GST bill, had a provision for such an institution, but nothing had been implemented. So in its voting, central government had 1/3 vote and states had 2/3 vote of total votes with equal voting rights regardless of size and stake. With the support of a dozen small states whose total GST collection is not more than 5% of the total and their budget is mostly underwritten by central government, the game is hugely in the central government's favor. With equal value for each state's voting, larger and mid-sized states, they feel shortchanged. Severe fiscal strain is expected when 14% compensation comes to an end, as the median growth rate of subsumed taxes is only 11%. And in many states, it is between 5 to 10%. So median subsumed tax buoyancy is below unity. That means with 1% growth, there will be a 0.7% growth of tax. So contraction of GST revenue across the country means that the compensation amount will be higher and the clamor for a continuance of the compensation scheme is inevitable. Second problem associated with GST, that is the design flow of the tax structure. Nearly 45 to 50% of commodity value is outside the purview of GST, like petrol and petroleum products. Additionally, states which exports or have interstate transfers of minerals and fossil fuel extractions, they are not getting revenue as origin states and need a compensation mechanism. Pre-existing threshold level of VAT value addition tax that had been tweaked to often, which has led to an evaporation of tax-based incentivizing, enabling evasion and misreporting. Most trading and retail establishments like small retailers, they are out of the fold of GST. And at the retail level, irrespective of whether input tax credit is required or not, the burden can be passed off to the consumer. And as a result of it, a loss could be as high as 1/3. Third problem, that is exemption from the registration and taxation of the GST have further eroded GST tax base compared to the tax base of the pre-existing VAT. So exemptions are purely distortionary and also provide a good chance to remain under the radar and directly increasing evasion or misclassification. Theoretically, exemptions at the final stage reduce tax realization. And as multiple rates are charged at different stages, it goes against the lessons of GST history. This tax works well with a single uniform tax rate for all commodities and services at all stages, inputs and outputs alike. So most countries have a single rate. India stands out and is among the 5 countries to have 4 rates or slabs. Now, exclusion of products from the tax purview. So fourth problem is the exclusion. Petroleum products that remain outside the purview of GST, that has helped center to increase cesses and decrease central excise in what would otherwise have been shareable with the states. Now, states will be keen on including petrol and diesel under GST as their share of tax goes up in the process and if there is a special rate fixed for it. In April 2017, cess and surcharge that formed 56% and 35% of the excise duty on petrol and diesel respectively, and their share has increased to 91 and 85% respectively, and the shareable central excise had reduced to rupees 6.5 a litre, that has made rupees 2.98 for petrol and 4.83 for diesel. So equity requires that petrol and diesel should be brought under GST. Apart from the complexity it creates in record keeping and granting ITC in the present form. indirect tax compliance. So it also leads to a cascading with the GST avowedly try to avoid. Fifth problem is what? Compliance with GST return. Filing, stipulation, and resultant tax information is not up to date. The gap in filing GST R1, that is GST return, was 32% in 2019-20, and it has been increasing. So as per GST R3B, that is GST return, the effective tax rate is as low as 6.5%, when GST return for the first had shown an increase average of 15% tax rate. So fraudulent claims of input tax credit because of lack of timely reconciliation are quite high, though it has come down by 2/3. And tax evasions had been estimated by a National Institute of Public Finance and Policies paper that was at least 5% in the smaller states and plus 3% in the bigger states. So this policy gap, basically, this is regards to a higher threshold when in sales tax it was lower. So this has basically higher threshold had been seen in the exemption level, and multiple tax rates have led to a base erosion. So policy gaps along with the compliance gaps do not need to be addressed. Without proper tax information, infrastructure, and base, states would go in for selective tax enforcement, and in the long run, voluntary compliance will suffer and equity in taxation will be violated. Finally, a grand bargain will come apart that will give all these problems. A version 2.0 of GST may have to be designed sooner rather than later. So these problems need to be addressed, and that can be addressed in the second version of GST, which is need of the time, which is requirement of the time. So sooner or later, it need to come. Now, next is what? India-Nepal flood management needs course correction. Two countries need to re-establish water cooperation as a common cause and draw inspiration from 1950s. So basically, this article is regarding India and Nepal relations and their flood mitigation program together. So this year on 4 to 5 May, Bihar's Disaster Management Department had released two documents that has been titled Pre-Flood Preparedness and Flood Control Order 2021. It means pre-flood preparedness. It means before the occurrence of flood, what preparedness had been done, and flood control order if that will be implemented after flood comes. So the aim was to help the local administration in terms of preparedness and having in place a relief support system. A solution to the issue of chronic flooding lies in revisiting the old plans and arrangements between India and Nepal. So that is because flood control in Bihar is just not possible till a dedicated intergovernmental panel is formed through a bilateral mechanism between India and Nepal that in turn can study, assess, and offer solutions to this shared crisis. If we talk about disaster management in Bihar, so basically Bihar Chief Minister should be credited for bringing disaster management into popular imagination in Bihar. In his early days being Bihar Chief Minister 2005 to 10, he made a few noticeable structural changes with renewed approaches in infrastructure augmentation for dams and reservoirs, detention basins, embankments, and channel improvements. Non-structural measures had also been adopted in later years like floodplain management, flood forecasting and warning, flood insurance and financial compensation. So despite the efforts made on the ground, people continue to suffer with perennial flood in North Bihar, that is Mithilanchal region. Although already they are facing a humanitarian crisis of sorts following the novel coronavirus pandemic, this year's extra rainfall and flood have been a moment of reckoning. Unfortunately, this chronic issue that had made over 5 crore people of the North Bihar in India and Tarai region of Nepal, they had become vulnerable. That does not seem to get attention it deserves by policymakers on both the sides of the borders. It means India and Nepal. So historically, if we see, Bihar had not been known to be India's most flood-prone state. Flood Management Improvement Support Center, the Department of Water Resources under Government of Bihar had estimated that 76% of the population in North Bihar would face recurring threat of flood devastation. And about 68,800 square kilometer out of a total geographical area of 94,163 square kilometer, or about 73.06% of the land area is flood affected. So large part of North Bihar adjoining Nepal is drained by a number of rivers that have their catchment in the steep and geological nascent Himalayas. Originating in Nepal, the high discharge and sediment loads in Kosi, Gandak, Budi Gandak, Bagmati, Kamla Balan, Mahananda, and Andhwara group wreak havoc in the plains of Nepal's Tarai and Bihar. And flood management improvement support system says that about 65% of the catchment area of these rivers falls in Nepal or Tibet, and only 35% of the catchment area lies in Bihar. But what happens? These rivers are flowing down from Himalaya to Tarai region. So they carry heavy sedimentation, and because of these heavy sedimentation, for example, Kosi River I talk about, it keep on changing its path. So because heavy siltation comes with it, so whenever sedimentation would come, siltation would come, so what will happen? Flood situation would emerge. These days, because of climate change, we are seeing melting of glacier is taking place, and because of this, what is happening? The level of water in the river, it is increasing, and it is already its carrying capacity is very much higher. So obviously, it will lead to flood in Bihar or northern Bihar. So a review by Kale in 1997 that has indicated that the plains of North Bihar have recorded highest number of floods during the last 30 years. In years like 1978, 87, 98, 2004, and 2007, Bihar had witnessed high magnitudes of flood. The total area that had got affected by floods had also increased during these years. So flood of 2004 demonstrates that severity of the flood problem when a vast area of 23,419 square kilometer had been badly affected by the floods of Bagmati, Kamla, and Adhwara group of rivers that had caused loss of about 800 human lives, even when Ganga, which is master drain, was flowing low. So, unlike all such indifferences shown by Kathmandu, it means by Nepal, on the matters of floods and water management recently, the history of cooperation between India and Nepal for embankments started in 1950s is worth looking at. When work on Kosi embankment started in January 1955, a group of retired Nepali soldiers came over voluntarily to join hands with Indian volunteers, and they started working the embankment. So it was such a progressive government-citizen interface that could not sustain itself, and water cooperation between the two countries for a common cause bond. Consequently, not much has happened barring the use of water resources of hydroelectric generation. For the people who are living in Madhubani, Darbhanga, Sitamarhi, Shohar, Saharsa, Supal, Purnia, Araria, Madhepura, Katihar, Samastipur, Muzaffarpur, Betia, Motihari, and Begusarai. Basically, these are those places of Bihar, those districts of Bihar, which are laying in the northern part of Bihar. So these are basically flood prone. These areas are flood prone, and flood is part of the lives of the people over there. So in this fact, infrastructure interventions like building embankments and rerouting streams have disturbed the conventional pattern of slow water flow. Earlier, without so many artificial barriers, the flow of water used to aid farming in the region. Kosi Treaty of 1954, under which embankments in Nepal were established and maintained, that was not futuristic and did not make enough provisions for the maintenance of embankments and rivers changing their course. So depositions of stones, sands, silt, and sediment has led to riverbeds rising that changed course and causing unimaginable losses. Between mid-18th and 20th centuries, Kosi is said to have been shifted over 100 kilometers westward. That had resulted in the large-scale human displacements. Also, there is a need for greater sensitization on climate imbalances and sustainable development. So ironically, the same flood-affected regions also face the issue of drought and sinking water table. So Nepal's wayward approach on the matter concerning water management with India, it would not be able to, it will not be appropriate to blame Nepal for releasing water from its river, which is causing flood on the Indian side, and on their part for believing that India is reaping the benefits from all the projects that were taken up in the past. So clearly course correction is required to re-establish water cooperation as a common cause, and they can draw inspiration for joint action for 1950s. Now, what measures should be taken to control flood? So as early as in 1937, transition from traditional method of flood control to the embankment-based British system was thought out. To control flood water at Barakshetra in Nepal, a high dam was planned and finally it was built after devastating Kosi flood in 1953. Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru visited flood-affected areas in 1953 and he announced a visionary Kosi scheme for the safe resettlement for the affected people. Then Lalit Narayan Mishra, who was former Union Cabinet Minister and was the first permanent political leader from Mithila region, who unwaveringly tried improving the infrastructure capabilities with Kosi project and other initiatives to control the flooding. In the mainstream political and policy establishments, greater attention required to be given to this annual calamity and its devastating effects on lives and livelihoods. India and Nepal needs to be in the dialogue to end the crisis of flooding every year with a long-term strategy of water management cooperation between India and Nepal. The matter should be looked into it. So this is all about this article. Next is about school going children, their lives, which has been impacted because of COVID-19. So this is what India's school children need their need their childhood back. Country needs to stop asking whether schools are safe and start acknowledging that in-person school is essential. So now it's been more than a year, somewhere 18 months had been passed when children had been in the school. So now this article is talking about importance of going to school. Why it is important for children to go to school. It is not only about education, but it is also about health of a children, of a child. So context of this article is what that schools have sporadically opened for higher grade students, and the board examination had been a key discussion point these days. Like board results had come out, students without giving examinations, their results had been given, and many of them are happy, but many of them are sad. They are protesting against the schools because they have not get good marks that had been what had been expected by them. So it has been impacted. So there is indeed some basis to the old joke that Indian parents have a razor sharp focus on academics and want their children to be a doctor or an engineer. This focus is not entirely misplaced, for academic results in the higher grades are important to determine colleges and professions, and for many Indians is a chance at a better life. So we should not lose sight of the importance of education in the younger years, as well as the overall purpose of education. In person, school education teaches children to share, wait to their turn, negotiate and compromise. By depriving them of social contract, we are depriving them of essential learning and development. Children from economically weak backgrounds, schools are a key source of nutrition. For some, schools serve as a safe spaces for the chaos of their homes. For many children, particularly those who do not have educated parents or cannot afford home tutors, the denial of education results in learning losses and ultimately denial of a chance to earn a livelihood. For parents, school closures have added to childcare and teaching duties. Household incomes are reducing amidst rising inflation as parents, mainly mothers, have quit their jobs. Indian Council of Medical Research recently had stated that once India starts considering, it will be wise to open primary schools first, then secondary schools. Also, we have to ensure that all support staff, whether it be school bus drivers, teachers, and other staffs in the school, they need to be vaccinated. Researchers do agree that children are at low risk of developing severe COVID-19 compared to adults. In June 2021, commenting on the World Health Organization, All India Institute of Medical Sciences Sero Survey, AIMS director had said that this study also looked at serosurveillance among children. And in the less than 18 years of age group, it was found that more than 50% of children in some areas, more than 80% of the children from both urban and rural areas had antibodies. That means that they were already infected and they have developed antibodies against COVID-19. So ICMR recently had released result of the 4th National Sero Prevalence Survey that showed that more than half of the children between 6 to 17 years were seropositive, and seroprevalence was similar in the rural and urban areas. So with the above given possibility, it is possible to think about starting schools in areas where community level of infection is very low. one-size-fits-all approach across India will not work now. That means that in some states like Kerala or Maharashtra, where COVID-19 cases could be surging again, students should stay at home, while their counterparts in other states where positivity rates are lower, they can start going to schools. There are a host of recommendations on how to open schools safely, including by World Bank, SRCC Children's Hospital, Mumbai and Lancet COVID-19 Commission, India Task Force. Schools cannot be opened overnight. There is a large amount of preparation that is required, and longer we wait to begin planning, the longer it will take to implement it. So as the immediate measure, government should call for a list of school staffs and procure full vaccination for them. Scientists should confirm if the gap between doses can be made shorter akin to healthcare workers. They should engage relevant experts to undertake public campaigns to make school staffs and parents aware of the low risk of transmission in schools and low severity in children, urge them to understand the science and encourage them to commit to a social contract to be ever vigilant and keep a sick or exposed child home. They need to issue guidelines for staggered reopening of primary schools, like example, 50% attendance or smaller group of students or alternate days or weeks. Upgrade school infrastructure to facilitate a hybrid system of learning where parents who do not wish to send their children to schools have their choice to continue with online learning. Train school teachers in hybrid learning, formulate and issue guidance on COVID-19 protocols to be adopted by schools, distancing to the extent possible, outdoor classes, weather permitting, masking, hand hygiene, and proper ventilation. Like scientists have indicated that even the humble pedestal fan can do wonders for ventilation. Then finalize logistics like packed meals and transport, and ensure availability of medical consultations so that staff and parents need not scramble for assistance. Then other required long-term measures which will also require funding, time and effort. That includes greater investment in healthcare facilities, particularly pediatric facilities, and implementation of systems to track local level of infections. So these are those immediate measures which can be taken place. So now how to mitigate the virus spread among the children? So as parents, we must recognize that cost of isolation and online learning for our young children. We cannot wait for children to get vaccinated because this may take years. According to media report, Britain has said that it has decided against giving mass COVID-19 vaccination to all children, and they would only be offered in certain situations, such as when young people have underlying health conditions. We cannot expect schools to provide 100% guarantee that our children will be safe. Nothing is risk-free. Risk must be managed with mitigation strategies. Instead, we must build mutual trust among governments, schools, and children. Each of us must implement and adhere to COVID-19 safety protocols that has been recommended by the scientists. Each of us must be vigilant and responsible, ensure all adults in our households are fully vaccinated, and ensure children stay home if sick or exposed. Until a greater proportion of the population is vaccinated, we should endeavor to curtail unnecessary travel or exposure, because we know from sero surveys that adults are bringing infections home. Parents group on social media are abuzz with requests for pods of students and home tutors. Education is like oxygen and medicine. Education like oxygen medicine during second novel coronavirus wave is becoming the responsibility, but also a privilege of private citizens. We cannot let status quo continue any longer. We need to stop asking whether schools are safe and start acknowledging that in-person school is essential. So there is no point of debate or discussion that whether school is safe or not, whether school is essential or not. We know that in-person school is very much essential. It is required for the development of the younger ones, because they are the future economy of our country. So we need to have some mitigation strategy. We need to send them to school so that learning and development can be taken place of a child. So extensive literature based on studies on transmission in schools is clear that children are not super spreaders. Schools are not hotspots or driving viral spread. For young children, even a few hours of interactions per week with their teachers and other children would be an excellent starting point. As Robin Jenkins, Global Director of Education for UNICEF, has said, that there are many countries in which parents can go out and they can have a nice cheap dinner, but their 7-year-old is not going to school. That's a problem actually. We need to come together to fix that problem and give our young children their childhood back. This is all about this article. Next article is about South Asia's emerging digital transformation. There is evidence that the region's post-pandemic adoption to digital life will shape its future prosperity. So this article is emphasizing upon the digital transformation which South Asia is required. So context is what that COVID-19 had forced South Asia to take a quantum leap in digitalization. And this shift to remote work and education has propelled an unprecedented spike in internet penetration, with even smaller nations like Nepal recording almost 11% increase in broadband internet users. For a region with threadbare public health infrastructure, digitization of healthcare services was a watershed moment that provides novel solutions to the public health crisis. In India, COVID-19 had accelerated the launch of National Digital Health Mission that is enhancing the accessibility and the efficiency of healthcare services that by creating a unique health ID for every citizen. Pandemic-induced suspension of bricks and mortar business spurred South Asia's embrace of e-commerce. It has boosted by digital payment systems. Bangladesh alone had witnessed an increase of 70 to 80% in online sales in 2020 that had generated $708.4 million in the revenues to Bangladesh. So, as one of the world's poorest regions, a wide digital divide is persisted in access and affordability between and within the countries of South Asia. Despite having the world's second largest online market, 50% of India's population are without internet and 59% of Bangladesh and 65% of Pakistan. With monetary and health assistance schemes that had distributed online, 51% of South Asia women were excluded from social protection measures during the pandemic. Children too were at receiving end, with 88% lacking access to internet-powered homeschooling. This disruption could permanently put children out of the school, place girls at risk of early marriage. It has pushed poor children into child labor that is costing economies billions of dollars in the future earnings. Businesses too have paid a heavy price for the gap in digital solutions, whereby many South Asian firms failing to embrace e-commerce or other cloud-based technologies to survive the financial chaos of the novel coronavirus pandemic. So the region had recorded a 64% decline in sales, with small and women-led firms faring the worst. So with COVID-19 transforming work life, the acute skills gap among the youth will continue that had created unemployment at another level. In that situation, digital transformation is a global imperative, with the adoption of advanced technologies such as cloud computing, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, big data, etc. That becomes a key to success. From banking to manufacturing and retails, the role of digital technology is very important. That need to be overlooked as countries embracing the digital revolution to drive their development agenda. At the forefront of Asian digitalization are countries like Singapore, Japan, and South Korea that is recognized as global technological hubs. Owing to increased smartphone and internet penetration, coupled with the availability of trusted digital payment platforms, China's e-commerce industry is set to reach $3 trillion in 2024. Digital boom in the associated of Southeast Asian nation, that is ASEAN countries, economies is pushing a common market initiative that had fostered regional economic integration and enhancing global competitiveness. South Asia has also made significant strides in the adoption of digital technologies. Digital Bangladesh Vision 2021 envisages transforming Bangladesh into a prosperous digital society, whereas India's biometric identification systems intend to improve the efficiency of welfare programs through digital innovation. So the region still has a long way to go. E-commerce could drive the post-pandemic growth in South Asia. Okay, I'll let you know. So e-commerce could drive post-pandemic growth in South Asia that provide new business opportunities and access to larger markets. In India, e-commerce could create 1 million of jobs by 2030, and it will be worth $200 billion by 2026. Fintech could drive significant growth, and it will reduce poverty by building financial inclusion. For instance, Pakistan's digital financial sector could boost GDP by 7% if faster payment gateway, lower cost and fast track licensing are put in place. So a timely, inclusive and sustainable digital transformation can not only bolster productivity and growth, but it will also serve as a panacea for some of the region's socio-economic divides. So, to reap the dividends of digital transformation, South Asia is required to address legal, regulatory, and policy gaps as well as boost digital skills. A robust digital infrastructure is a sine qua non, and there exists a huge financial gap. India alone needs an annual investment of $35 billion to be in the top 5 global digital economy and public-private partnership that needs to be leveraged for the region's digital infrastructure financing. Regulatory roadblocks need to be addressed as e-commerce regulations are weak in South Asia. For the sector to drive growth, issues like customer protection, digital and market access regulation, etc., is required to be addressed. There would be no digital revolution without universal digital literacy. Governments and businesses that need to come together to revamp the education system to meet the demands for digital skills and online platforms. So the cross flow of data and personal information calls for stringent cybersecurity measures, as many as are been experiencing painful lessons in data privacy during this pandemic. In South Asia, only a third of the interregional trade potential had been exploited, losing out somewhere $23 billion in revenues. By addressing issues like regulatory barriers on currency flows, inhibiting online payments to transport-related constraints for cross-border e-commerce activities, South Asia can emulate the European Union's digital single market proposal. During the pandemic, South Asian nations joined hands to collectively battle the crisis by contributing towards a COVID-19 emergency fund, exchanging data and information on health surveillance, sharing research findings, and developing an online learning platform for health workers. If 8 nations, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal, Maldives, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka can start walking the talk, partnership for a successful digital revolution is plausible. So it will need vision, wisdom, and commitment at the highest level of the region's political leadership. So digital future is possible only after collaboration of these countries. So COVID-19 has rendered old ways of operating redundant. Concerted collaboration at all the levels is required to push South Asia out of stagnancy and towards a digital future of shared prosperity. Right concoction of regulatory and physical infrastructure, skill sets, and regional cooperation can lead toward a digital utopia, whereas the lack of which can breed a dystopian tomorrow. Adequate support is required for those who risk falling through the net of digital progress. So here a digital vision is required, a shared digital vision is required that could place the region on the right track towards the fourth industrial revolution. So these are important articles of the week which we have discussed. I hope it will helpful for you. So this is all about the day. I think just a moment. Hello.